Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome today's program, Adam Campaign, who is CEO at ClearMetal. And today we're going to talk about next generation supply chain visibility. Now, supply chain logistics executives were, granted one wish to make their work lives easier and more productive. I bet many of them would say, I wish I had end-to-end supply chain visibility. It's certainly been an unfulfilled goal for many companies, for many years. But while many challenges still remain, technology is beginning to help out in this area and make this a more achievable goal. So why has this been such an elusive goal for many companies, and how is technology, specifically things like AI and machine learning and predictive analytics, helping to move the needle in this area? Well, those are going to be some of the questions and the focus of today's episode, and it's great to bring Adam back to the program to share his insights and perspective on this topic. So Adam, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks. Good to be back, Adrian.
So Adam, like I said, just now, achieving end-to-end supply chain visibility has been a top priority for, executives across all industries, for many years. But, for many companies, it's really remained an elusive goal. In your conversations with companies, why has it been so difficult to achieve?
Yeah, so I think simply put, it's because the underlying data problem hasn't been solved. So if regardless of whether you are a carrier, a 4PL, 3PL, a technology provider that's been around for a while, the garbage in, garbage out problem is still a challenge for many to deal with. If you look at the data in the industry, sourced for, and I'm talking about transportation visibility, if you look at that data that's coming from the motor carriers, coming from the terminal operators, coming from other carriers and elsewhere, that data is inherently flawed. And as it moves from the source of the data into a 3PL carrier and then presented back through a system to a retailer or manufacturer, the data is challenging to understand. Quite specifically, where are the shipments, right? Because visibility is all about where are my shipments, what is happening to them or going awry, and then what is the likely arrival time of that at the destination. And if you look at the information being supplied, being relied on to answer those kind of questions, it is flawed. Very specifically, if you look at EDI today, which the industry is built on, the messages around vessel departures, vessel arrivals, in and out gates, final arrivals, empty container dispatches, and things like that, the information is often conflicting, latent, out of sequence, or has a whole bunch of errors. And so how are you possibly able to understand those three core questions? Where are my shipments? What's going on with them? And when are they going to arrive? If the information that you get about those shipments is just flawed and difficult to make sense of.
Yeah, no, I've been on this, on this kind of campaign as well for many years in terms of talking about the importance of data quality management. It's one of those questions whenever I ask, executives, who owns data quality management at your company? I get this blank stare, because the reality is no one historically has owned that, right? If you ask logistics professionals, transportation executives, they would say, well, that's IT's problem, right? And if you talk to IT, they would say, well, that's not our problem. If you could just get the carriers and your suppliers and your customers to send you clean data and timely data, we wouldn't have a problem, right? So, and I think that's been, part of the underlying, challenge here. And then, of course, we all know that we have an explosion of data and information, today with mobile and IoT and the like, that is, further complicating this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what you said, I just got off a call with a top 20 shipper who said the same thing. Hey, theoretically, shouldn't I be able to have my 4PLs or 3PLs provide this better information? I think, you ask about how is technology helping this, and who's really at fault here? No one's at fault, right? It's difficult to move things around the world. It's difficult for information to be correct when there are a lot of moving pieces and it's highly dynamic. But the reality is that whoever is the recipient of the information and needing to make sense of it to make decisions, especially around inventory or operations, it's ultimately that person or team's job to make sense of that data. And so where technology is coming in today is it's acting sort of as a co-pilot, I'd call it, to help people make sense of information so they can be empowered to make better decisions. A good example of this is, this same company deals a lot with detention and demurrage charges. And their challenge is that they have difficult time just seeing where things are laying up for too long. And the challenge there is having everything in one place, having all the information they need, accessible to them at their fingertips, and then also understanding the truth behind that certain container, right? So what we've done is we've used AI and data science techniques to do two things: ingest and aggregate and make sense of all that data and put it in one place, and then offer reliable information about the status or whereabouts of that shipment, so that the major retailer I'm speaking about can actually see if things are sitting in D&D for too long, and then go and take action and chase that down.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. You kind of just got into what was going to be my next question, because obviously, I think if you go back, certainly when I started in the industry, 20 years ago, we kind of saw this new class of software that ultimately came and went, right? It was, the supply chain execution, visibility, application, which was really just, and I think part of the reason that a lot of these solutions failed to deliver was because of this underlying data, quality problem, which was really more just providing some, dashboards to see where things were, right? But I think, no one at the time, 20 years ago, was really focusing on this, the data quality management piece. So really a lot of the it was either information overload or data, it wasn't really exception management. So people just got all these alerts and bells and whistles and everything else, and they shut it off, or it was garbage. A lot of the information that they were seeing, they just weren't trusting because the underlying data was faulty. But you fast forward to today, you brought up some of these newer technologies or emerging technologies that obviously is in the headlines today, AI, machine learning, predictive analytics. And those things are now people getting excited again about the role that technologies can play in addressing this goal of end-to-end supply chain visibility. You gave some examples there. Can you kind of shed a little bit more light on, elaborate a little bit on how AI, machine learning, and particularly predictive analytics, that's an area I think a lot of folks are really interested in, what role they're beginning to play here?
Yeah, and I'll start off by saying I think you're right. The technologies over the past 30 years have actually done a very good job at aggregating data, collecting data, and taking it in, right? That was the first step, and the companies before us, I think, did a good job at that. Now, especially because there's much more data, you're also right, this topic of how do you make sense of that information, and more importantly, get trusted and reliable data, right? Because often the information companies are getting today is conflicting, right? Which is very confusing. So we're now in that next era of how do you make sense of the data to then make reliable decisions upon it, and that is where technology is coming in. So to share a few more examples, again, sticking with the transportation space, often companies are making decisions about how far in advance to order freight and procure freight based on average transit times or static transit tables. So every 6 months, a retailer will look at the historical transit time and reliability for carriers and determine from then on, for the next 6 months, how far in advance to order. If you can get more reliable information about, or actually more dynamic information about transit times, not just port to port, but inland origin destination pairs, you can start to make more intelligent decisions about how far in advance to procure freight and actually lower some of the buffer stock or inventory on hand. If you're thinking about a large supplier, for example, right, who often go through transshipment ports to reach their ultimate customer, they're often complaining to us that where they're lacking in customer satisfaction is delays caused by transshipment. And the issue is often a carrier or 3PL will report, because it's the best information they have, that a shipment is on its way, when in fact it has missed its a transshipment connection and is then going to be, call it 2 weeks delayed to their final customer. By having the kind of AI technology that we've built to make sense of the shipment status and reconcile it with other third-party data sources like AIS satellite information, we can actually tell the likelihood or the risk associated with missing that transshipment up front. And on top of that, alerting a supplier so that they can then alert their end customer on exactly where that shipment is and if there's going to be a delay, right? And customers like that because then they can run their supply chains more optimally. The third example I'll give is we hear a lot about the need to staff labor in the warehouse properly. but people's inability to do that because they can't see what's coming upstream. So being able to understand, is the shipment out for delivery or actually delivered? Or did it actually arrive, or does it just depart the transshipment port on its way to the last port of call? That information is necessary to, people need reliable information there. And the way we're employing machine learning is to first understand what is the true status of that shipment and reconcile again, did it get out of the port and go onto a truck or rail leg? Is it still stuck, with a freight or customs hold kind of thing? And how can you be more accurate and predictive with when it's going to finally arrive? So those kind of going through the transportation chain, 3 examples of how we're seeing our machine learning clean and correct data to give more sensible data information that customers can rely on.
Yeah, no, I think those are 3 great examples. And I think that the last point you just touched upon there, which is something we've talked about in your previous appearances here on Talking Logistics, which, I think it's not, something that's as sexy as some of the things we just talked about here. But the fact that, one of the things going back to the data quality piece, whenever I used to talk about data quality management, we would always talk about, it had to be timely, it had to be accurate, and it had to be complete. And I think the machine learning aspect of it is that the completeness factor of it. What would happen in the past is that if any of those 3 things were not true, transactions would stop, right? If there was a missing field or something of that nature, things would get kicked off, and then that would introduce some friction and some latency in the process. But I think one of the interesting things that I know from your experience and some of the things you're doing with the technology is that, leveraging machine learning to actually address that, in particular, that completeness dimension of data quality management. Can you explain a little bit? Maybe I explained that at too much a high level, but can you just kind of touch upon that a little bit more? Because I think that's an area that I'm beginning to hear more and more people talk about, because they want to move away from keep these transactions moving and not have it get kicked off or stop because some field might be missing or whatever. Where now, because you have all this big data and you've got this machine learning, you could actually perhaps keep those things moving by leveraging this newer technology.
Yeah, I think I think a big challenge is that technology systems, visibility providers in the past have often used rule-based systems to say if X, then Y. So if the if the container doesn't get to Long Beach like we believed it should have, or like the carrier explained it would, then it has not arrived, right? So think of a scenario where a ship is actually coming into Long Beach, it's rerouted into LA. And so the status message will say LA, and due to the plan, because it didn't kind of verify an arrival at Long Beach, it will appear as if that shipment hasn't arrived. Of course, if you're a bit more dynamic and don't have these rules, you could understand, or a technology system can understand, that it did arrive because LA and Long Beach are actually quite close. It did hit the shore, and now it's going to get onto a rail outgate and head toward its final destination. So I think a big challenge that we're often seeing is these rules that often break down when things are a little bit different. The same can be true for receiving multiple timestamps, right? That might confuse a system, or a certain UN low code that doesn't look exactly right. So because we don't have rule-based systems and it's not so static, it's much more dynamic and adaptive, we can understand things that previously, there might be a data quality error or sort of a lack in visibility, where we can actually bring light to that gap.
Yeah, no, that's a great explanation there. So going back to the examples you just talked about, it sounded like if you're putting together a business case, for this, or the value proposition around this, I mean, there's a value around kind of a inventory perspective. There's a value from a labor perspective. Obviously customer experience or customer service perspective. I mean, are those kind of the 3 main buckets? When you think about some of the use cases here and the value propositions here, I mean, what are you seeing with the customers you're working with right now and the use cases they're exploring? What's the main business value that they're focusing on?
Yeah, so I think it's a few buckets. We're seeing obviously a whole bunch of cost reductions, right? So the ability actually even just to spend a little less managing the cumbersome process of EDI feeds and all that. So there's a reduction on that IT spend. There's a reduction in detention and demurrage fees because you can actually get visibility into what's going wrong or see that on a predictive basis to avoid those fees. And some retailers are spending, 10, 20, 30, 40 million a year in all these sort of hidden D&D expenses. We see a reduction in costs also on the drayage side, right? All these exceptions where you may be dispatching a motor carrier for a box that isn't actually available for pickup, those sorts of things. As well as being able, companies being able to shift some transportation spend from air to ocean because they understand that with the predictive information, they can be more reliable and having product arrive on time, going that much cheaper ocean leg. So there's a whole bunch of cost reduction elements. I think there's also improvements that we're seeing and our customers are telling us about on the profitability gain side. So suppliers are often saying that by being able to deliver product on time and full with high quality in a tighter sort of window, they're actually able to upcharge for that product. And on the retail or the buyer side, we're seeing the potential for reducing stockouts, right? If you're able to understand where things are, being able to source inventory from multiple DCs and things like this, we do see the ability to get product on the shelf increase and therefore reduce sort of stock out types of scenarios. Then also there are a bunch of other categories that we've seen emerge from customers using our software. The customer service side has become a massive one, right? Being able to provide, up-level the day-to-day work of your team to move from detective work, kind of running around and chasing down exceptions and whereabouts of product, and shift that effort actually to a more strategic work that's more customer facing and proactive by being able to see reliable information and notify end customers of that. We're also seeing, I'll also add on the finance side, so the CFO's office being interested in that by being able to understand the exact arrival of product at a customer's hands, they're able to actually invoice and shorten that invoice to payment cycle and increase some cash flow. On the flip side, that's also true, right? By being able to purchase product at a little bit of a later stage, you can actually reduce those financing interest costs that are coming up. So it's across the board, but it's cost reduction, the revenue improvement possibilities, customer service, and competitive advantage, as well as on the financial side.
Yeah, no, pretty broad base there of different value buckets. I think the good news is, I think certainly this has been true over the past year. You almost can't pick up the Wall Street Journal these days on a day-to-day basis and not have some kind of supply chain story in the front page, whether it's related to how transportation costs are impacting the quarterly financial results of various companies, or how it's being used, how companies are looking to leverage their supply chain as a competitive differentiator, or not just on the cost side, but really to on the customer experience side, or to drive revenue and profitability, as you just talked about. So I think it's something that, again, going back to 20 years ago, this is actually getting elevated now, to the C-level, where you can actually have these kinds of conversations, or discuss how this can bring value to the to the organization. Well, Adam, we're kind of coming up to the end of our time here, so I just want to, as a way to wrap up, I mean, what do you see as the biggest mistake, perhaps, that companies are making or make in their quest to achieve end-to-end supply chain visibility? Or maybe as a follow-up, or to ask you a little bit differently, I mean, how should companies approach achieving this goal today?
Yeah, so we're seeing mistakes all over the place, but I think it's because a lot of folks are new to this. Look, the whole premise is, due to the Amazon effect and a number of other factors, you have to be better in your supply chain. To be better in your supply chain, you need visibility, right? And the reason people can't get visibility that they need is because of the underlying data problem. So, just to kind of echo that back, that's what we're seeing. In terms of mistakes, I think we see companies doing a few things. First, believing that they're going to finally get, what they were promised from the systems that they are and have been having trouble with for years now, right? There's this belief that, we're told now we're going to get this actual next thing, and we see companies waiting around forever to get it. Meanwhile, competition is blowing by. We also see companies not fully recognizing that, transformation in the supply chain is truly a journey. It's not possible to have an unbelievable end-to-end, sourcing all the way down through last mile distribution system, no matter how fancy the graphics or interfaces are. So it's a mistake to jump in and feel like you can get it all at once. You have to be diligent and take this step by step. The other thing that we're seeing is it's a competitive environment out there, right? There's a whole lot of marketing, and I think the nascent buyers aren't asking the right questions or the deep enough questions about how the underlying data problem is really solved. And I could go on, but there are a number of different avenues people are taking where our advice would be, start in one specific spot of your supply chain and start to transform that. Make sure that there is an underlying data problem solved. Third, don't be intimidated by the fancy marketing and the talk of all these buzzwords like blockchain and AI. Lastly, just realize there are new types of approaches and technologies that can help you solve this underlying data problem that you've never been able to solve before, thereby solving the visibility issue that you've been looking after for a couple of years now. So anyway, a bit of a ramble, but a whole bunch of ways for companies to start, and this is possible today.
No, I think you provided some great, some questions for companies to ask themselves and to think about, and some words of caution there, and some good advice there. So, again, this is one of those topics that is always of interest to supply chain logistics executives, because it is to your point, it's one of those areas that, going back to my opening remarks, if they had that one wish, they know that if they truly achieve this, it really opens the door to a lot of possibilities for them, by having that visibility. And, certainly I think they've hopefully they've learned the lessons, or are beginning to learn the lessons that, this data quality management piece is important and a critical foundation to doing what, to achieving that promise. And that, some of these emerging technologies, rather than being intimidated by them, they're really, coupled with data quality management, they're really moving the needle in the right direction here. So Adam, as always, thank you for making the time to be with us and sharing your thoughts and perspective on this topic.
Yeah, thanks. It was fun.
And I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the ClearMetal website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or comment for Adam, you can post it there, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.